The great golden doors opened slowly with a deep, heavy sound. Guards in dark silver armor stood on each side, tall and still. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, but their weapons were ready. In the center of the room, the alien queen sat. On her throne, she wore a long dress made of shimmering black cloth that moved like water. Her skin glowed a soft violet. Her eyes were sharp and cold. The room went silent as the prisoner was brought in. He was human, thin and bruised, with cuts. On his arms and dust on his face, his hands were tied in glowing cuffs and his steps were slow but steady. Even in chains, he didn't look afraid. He raised his head and met the queen's eyes. That one small act made the nobles gasp. No one looked the queen in the eye. No one. But this human did. The queen raised one eyebrow, curious. "You are the one who survived the siege of Tharval?" she asked, her voice calm. He didn't bow, didn't kneel. He only nodded once. "I didn't mean to survive," he said, "but I did." The queen smiled, but there was no kindness in it. "Do you know where you are?" she asked. He glanced around the tall black pillars and glowing walls. "The heart of your empire," he said, "the place where I should die." Some nobles laughed coldly, others whispered. One stepped forward, a tall alien with golden horns. "My queen, allow me to end this human's life. It's a waste to speak with him." But the queen held up her hand, stopping him. She stood slowly from her throne and walked down the steps. Her dress flowed behind her like smoke. She stopped in front of the human, just one step away. He didn't flinch. "I offer you something." "Rare," she said softly. "A reward?" The room froze. A reward? For a human? For a prisoner of war? The nobles looked confused, angry, and shocked. "Anything you ask," she continued, her eyes locked on his face. "Gold, freedom, a ship, your life. Just name it." Everyone expected him to beg for mercy, to cry for his planet, but he didn't. He looked at her for a long moment, then he said just 4 words. "I want you, Queen." The air was sucked out of the room. A deadly silence followed. Guards gripped their weapons tighter. Nobles gasped and hissed. Even the queen blinked, her face unreadable. Then she laughed. Once, soft and strange. "No one has ever asked for that," she said quietly. The human didn't smile, didn't joke, he just nodded. "I know," he said. She circled him slowly, studying him like a puzzle. "Do you even know what you're asking?" she whispered. He didn't answer, but the silence between them was louder than any words. The queen turned back to the throne and spoke. "Release his chains." A wave of chaos moved through the court. "But my queen," a noble shouted. "Now," she commanded, her voice sharp like a blade. The cuffs unlocked with a hum, and the human rubbed his wrists. He didn't run, didn't thank her, just stood tall. The queen looked at him over her shoulder. "You may stay as my guest," she said. "For now." The nobles were speechless. The guards looked confused. The queen returned to her throne and sat down, her face calm again. But deep inside her chest, her heart beat faster. No one saw it, but her fingers trembled slightly on the armrest. She had given a human the power to choose, and he chose her. She didn't know whether to feel amused, insulted, or afraid, but one thing was clear. This human was not ordinary, and from this moment, nothing in her empire would ever be the same again. The throne room was quiet after the human left. But inside the queen's mind, a storm had begun. She sat on her throne, unmoving, her face calm, but her heart thudded like war drums in her chest. No one had ever dared to ask for her, not even the high lords. To them, she was untouchable, cold, perfect, but that human, bruised and worn, had looked at her like she was just a person. She rose from the throne, her steps slow. The nobles watched her with wide eyes but said nothing. They could sense the change in the air. She walked down the side hallway, through a secret passage only she used. Guards didn't follow. Her, they knew better. The queen needed to be alone. She entered her private chamber. The doors shut behind her with a soft thud. Golden light from the ceiling shimmered across the room, but she walked into the dark corner. There stood a tall mirror, old, cracked with silver edges. She looked into it and removed her crown. For a moment, she wasn't a queen. She was just Silari. She whispered the name to herself. It was a name no one used anymore, not even her advisors. Silari, she said again, voice barely there. That was the name she had as a child, back before the wars, before the throne, before the pain. She sat down on the edge of her silk-covered bed, and the memories came back like ghosts. She had once loved a human, many years ago. A soldier, like this one, kind and brave. But he was taken from her by her own people. They said she had to forget him. They said humans were weak, dirty beneath her, but she never forgot. And now, years later, another human stood before her. Not begging, not trembling, asking to choose her, not as a queen, but as something else. It cracked something inside her, something she had buried. Long ago, a soft knock came at the door. Enter, she said quietly. A small alien girl with blue skin and big eyes stepped in. Her personal maid. My queen, she said, bowing low. The human is in the guest wing. He asked for food, but not guards. The queen nodded slowly. Send him what he wants, she said, and tell the guards to keep their distance. The maid bowed again and left. The queen stood and walked toward her window. The city stretched. Below, glowing in soft purples and blues, flying ships moved through the sky like silent birds. But her eyes were not on the city. They were on the past. She touched a small silver locket that hung hidden under her dress. Inside was a faded picture of a human face, long dead, her first and only love. She had broken every rule to keep that memory, and now another human had stepped into her life like a shadow from yesterday. Later that night, she entered the memory hall, a long, quiet place deep inside the palace where ancient rulers left behind pieces of their history. Holograms flickered, voices echoed softly from the walls. But she walked past them all, until she reached a locked door. She placed her hand on it and it opened slowly. Inside was her private archive, things no one else could see. She pulled out an old file, hidden behind layers of security. It was marked with a red symbol. Dangerous. Knowledge. She opened it and the screen lit up, showing images of her lost human. And next to it, records of a child, born long ago, but unregistered. She stared at the file, her hands shaking. Could it be? She whispered. No. Impossible. But something about the human's face, his calm voice, his eyes, felt familiar. Was it just a trick of fate? Or had the past somehow returned to test her again? She didn't know, but one thing was clear. This human was different, and if he was who she feared, or hoped he was, then everything she had built was about to fall apart. She stood in the dark room, silent. Her heart, once made of steel, now ached with old pain. And somewhere in the palace guest wing, the human slept, unaware that the queen, who offered him anything, might already belong to him in ways neither of them fully understood. The dining chamber was glowing with soft golden light. Crystal dishes, silver goblets, and rare fruits from across the stars filled the long table. Nobles sat along the sides, dressed in sharp silk and metal, whispering with tight smiles. But their eyes were not on the food. They were watching the human. He sat at the queen's left side, calm, straight-backed, like he belonged there. Even though he wore only clean linen clothes, even though he had no title, no rank, no power. The queen sat at the head of the table, her face unreadable. She picked up a goblet and sipped, her eyes never leaving the human's. He hadn't touched his food yet. Are you not hungry? She asked softly, her voice smooth like silk. I'm not sure what's safe to eat, he said without fear. Would you like to try it first? The room froze. A human, joking with the queen. She smiled, slow and dangerous. But underneath, there was something else, something soft. She picked a slice of purple fruit and ate it. her eyes on him. "There, now eat," she said. He nodded and finally took a bite. The nobles whispered again, but this time their voices were full of confusion and curiosity. "So," the queen said, leaning back in her seat, "why did you ask for me? You could have asked for anything." The human wiped his mouth with the cloth, then looked at her. "Because everyone wants power, gold, or ships," he said. "But none of that makes you safe." She tilted her head, curious. "And I do?" she asked. "No," he said, "but you looked the loneliest." The words hit harder than a blade. The nobles fell silent, not knowing whether to laugh or stay quiet. The queen's hand paused on her goblet. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not with insult but with truth plain and sharp. "I'm not lonely," she replied. But her voice cracked just a little. "You are," he said gently. "Even your smile is tired." For a moment, the mighty throne hall felt small, as if the rest of the galaxy had vanished. Just her and this strange human and his strange honesty. She stood, her long robe sweeping the floor. "Come," she said to him. Without a word, he followed. They walked through a quiet corridor behind the dining chamber. Guards stayed behind. Nobles whispered in shock. At the end of the hall was a wide-open balcony. The stars above shimmered like scattered diamonds. The queen stepped out and rested her hand on the railing. He stood beside her, saying nothing. "You risked your life to speak that way in my court," she said. "I've already faced death," he replied. "What's one more chance to speak the truth?" She looked at him. Really looked. His eyes held no hate, no fear, just calm understanding. It shook her, more than any war ever had. "My people think humans are beneath them," she said slowly. "And you?" he asked. She hesitated. "I used to think the same," she whispered. "But now I'm not so sure." A long silence passed between them. Wind moved her hair gently, and he saw the tired weight in her eyes. "I wasn't always a queen," she said, surprising even herself. He looked at her, patient, listening. "I used to be someone else, someone softer," she continued. "But softness dies in war." He didn't try to comfort her, didn't offer lies. "You can still be both," he said, strong and kind. She turned her face away, her throat tight. Then, to change the subject, she asked, "What's your name, human?" He looked surprised, then smiled faintly. "Darren," he said. "Just Darren." The name settled in her chest like a seed finding soil. She hadn't asked a prisoner's name in years. "Why did you really come to my empire?" she asked. "I didn't," he said. "Your army came to mine, and now you sit beside your enemy's queen," she said. "Maybe you're not the enemy," he replied quietly. "Maybe you're just trapped like me." She stared at the stars in silence for the first time in ages. She didn't feel like a ruler. She felt like a woman again, standing beside a man who didn't want her crown, only her truth, and for the first time in years, she didn't want to send someone away. The palace was silent that night. Most nobles had gone to sleep. The guards walked quietly, and the air felt heavy with something unseen. In the guest wing, Darren sat alone in his room, staring at the stars through a tall glass window. He had no weapons, no plan, and no idea what the queen truly wanted from him. But his heart wasn't afraid. It was curious. A soft knock broke the silence. He turned, half expecting a servant. But when the door opened, it was her, the queen. She wore no crown, no armor, just a dark cloak over a simple dress. Her face looked softer without the royal mask. "May I enter?" she asked quietly. Darren stood, surprised. "Of course," he said. She stepped in and closed the door behind her. Her eyes scanned the room, then settled on him. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "Too many voices in my head." "I know, that feeling," Darren replied. "Some voices never leave." She moved toward the window, her fingers touching the glass. The stars outside reflected in her violet eyes. "When I was young, I used to think stars were alive," she said softly. watching us from above. Darren smiled. Maybe they are. She looked at him, a small laugh escaping her lips. It wasn't a queen's laugh. It was real, tired, human. I want to ask you something, she said, turning to face him. Why do you keep looking at me like I'm not dangerous? Because you're not, he said calmly. Her brow rose. I've ordered entire planets to burn. And yet you're here, he said. Alone, unsure, asking questions. That doesn't sound like a monster to me. She walked closer, standing just a few steps away. My people call me the Blood Crown, she said. They tell stories about my cold heart. Maybe they don't know you, Darren said. Or maybe they only know what you show them. Her lips trembled just slightly. She lowered her eyes. I didn't choose this path, she whispered. I was pushed into it every step. Darren didn't move closer, but his voice grew softer. What would you choose if you could? She looked up at him, her voice barely a breath. Peace. The word hung in the air like a fragile glass. I've lived with war for so long I forgot what quiet felt like. They stood in silence, the distance between them full of truth. Then carefully she reached out her hand. Darren looked at it, then slowly took it in his. Her hand was cold, but her grip was strong. It wasn't a command. It was a connection, something old and something new. I don't know why I trust you, she said, but I do. I don't know why I'm still alive, he replied, but maybe it was to meet you. She smiled, but it carried sadness. I've lost too many people, she said. I don't want to lose anything more. Darren's voice was steady. Then don't, he said. Start again with me here. Suddenly, a loud knock shattered the quiet. She let go of his hand and turned sharply. The door opened without her word. Only one person would dare. Do that. General Kiros, her most loyal and brutal commander, stepped inside. His eyes narrowed when he saw her so close to the human. My queen, he said with stiff formality. You're needed in the war chamber now. She nodded, her voice returning to the cold royal tone. I will come, she said, then looked at Darren once more. But her eyes said what her lips could not. Don't say anything. She followed Kiros out, her cloak sweeping behind her. Darren stood still, alone again, but something inside him had changed, and he knew. So had she. Later that night in the war chamber, Kiros spoke in whispers. The nobles are growing restless, he warned. They think you're too soft with the human. She stared at the glowing map on the wall, her voice hard. Let them whisper, she said. I decide what soft is and what power means. But her hands were clenched because deep down she knew the danger had only just begun. The Royal Council chamber was cold and sharp. Black stone walls curved like the inside of a blade. A long table of dark glass stretched through the center. Around it sat the Queen's highest nobles, generals, governors, spies, and advisors, all dressed in silence. Their eyes watched the door, their voices quiet. Something was wrong, and everyone could feel it. The Queen entered with slow steps, her cloak dragging behind her. She took her place at the head of the table, her face calm, but inside, she felt a storm building. She could feel the whispers hiding in the room, whispers about him, about the human who now dined at her side and whose presence threatened everything they thought they controlled. Counselor Varric stood first, his golden armor glowing faintly. He was old, sharp, and dangerous with words. My queen, he said, we come with concern, not disrespect. She raised an eyebrow. Speak it then. Varric bowed his head. The human must be removed. The room went still. The Queen didn't blink. Removed? She asked. Discreetly, Varric continued. He is a distraction, a threat to your image, and a weakness others will strike. Several nobles nodded. Some avoided her eyes. She knew then. It wasn't just a warning. It was a plan already forming. I decide what is threat and what is not, she said, her voice cold. Varric didn't flinch. You are our queen, yes, he said, but we are the shield that keeps you standing. If you fall, said another noble, so does the empire. The Queen stood, her hands pressed, on the table. Let me make something clear, she said, her voice sharp. If any hand touches that human without my word, I will cut it off myself. Gasps moved across the room. Even the boldest nobles looked shaken, but Varric didn't back down. He bowed slightly, then said, "We understand, my queen," but she knew better. The danger hadn't ended. It had only gone into the shadows. That night, she walked fast through the dark halls, her cloak trailing like smoke behind her. She didn't tell her guards where she was going. She didn't trust anyone right now except one. She reached the guest wing, but Darren wasn't in his room. Her heart jumped for a moment. Then she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, and there he was. He held a small plate of food, surprised to see her. "Did I break a rule?" he asked lightly. She didn't smile. "They want you dead," she said. Darren froze, then placed the plate down slowly. "I figured as much," he said calmly. "They see you as a weakness," she said, walking closer. "And you?" he asked, voice quiet. "What do you see me as?" She looked at him, truly looked. "You're the only thing in this palace that makes me feel real," she whispered. He didn't speak, just held her gaze. She stepped closer, and for the first time, she placed her hand over his chest. "I won't let them touch you," she said, "even if it starts a war." "Are you sure I'm worth that?" he asked. Her voice cracked. "I don't know if I'm sure of anything anymore." A loud crash echoed from the hall. They both turned sharply. Then the door burst open. 2 armored figures charged in, weapons raised. Darren pushed the queen behind him without thinking, but the attackers stopped mid-step. A dozen royal guards poured into the room, weapons drawn. "Lower your arms," shouted the captain. "On the queen's command." The attackers were dragged away, but the queen saw their faces. They were her own guards, ones loyal to the council, not to her. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from rage. They had crossed the line. That night, she called a meeting of her personal war circle. Only her most trusted entered the chamber. She laid her hand flat on the table and said, "Prepare for power to shift." One of her generals looked worried. "Do you mean war?" "No," she said, "I mean loyalty. If they won't give it freely, I'll take it." Back in his room, Darren sat alone again, his eyes on the stars, his thoughts racing. He had become more than a guest, more than a reward. He was now a line, the one they could not cross without burning the crown that ruled them, and somewhere deep inside the queen's heart, the chains of duty began to crack. Because for the first time, she wasn't fighting to keep power. She was fighting to protect someone who saw her as more than just a throne. The queen stood at the edge of the hidden chamber, her hands clenched behind her back. The walls around her flickered with quiet maps, routes, tunnels, city grids, no one else had seen in years. Only one other person stood with her in the room, Darren. He looked at the glowing images, his jaw tight. "They won't stop," he said. "Not until one of us is dead." She nodded slowly, her voice cold. "Then we give them what they don't expect. Disappearance." It was late, long past the change of the 3rd guard shift. Most of the palace slept, unaware of what was about to happen. In the halls above, nobles plotted, generals whispered, but down below the queen and her human were preparing to vanish. She tapped a secret panel, and a door hissed open in the stone. Behind it, a narrow tunnel stretched into blackness. "Only 2 people know this path," she said, "and one is buried." Darren didn't ask questions, he only nodded and followed her into the dark. The door slid shut behind them, sealing them from the empire above. As they walked, the air grew cooler, older, untouched. It smelled of dust, old stone, and something else. Freedom. The queen's dress was gone, replaced by traveler's clothes. She wore a plain cloak, a small knife hidden in her sleeve. Darren carried only a light and a tiny pouch of food. They didn't speak for a long time, only the sound of their footsteps echoed through the narrow path, until finally she said, "I never thought I'd run from my own palace." "You're not running," he replied. "You're choosing." She stopped and looked at him. "No one ever gave me a choice before," she whispered. He smiled gently. "Then let this be your first." Suddenly the ground trembled beneath them. A soft boom echoed through the tunnel. Explosions? Darren asked quickly. She shook her head, her face tightening. No, she said. They've found out. Someone's following us. Darren turned off the light. They stood in the dark, listening. Faint voices, heavy boots, getting closer. We take the river path, she whispered. Faster, but dangerous. Lead the way, he said. They turned sharply down a side passage. The air changed, becoming damp and cool. Soon they reached a wide underground stream rushing through ancient stone. She stepped onto a flat metal raft hidden near the edge. Darren helped her steady it, then pushed them into the flow. The water pulled them fast. Cold spray hit their faces. As the current dragged them through curves and drops behind them, voices shouted, light beams flashed, but the tunnel twisted like a serpent, too tight for groups to follow quickly. Still, they were not safe. They passed under a low ceiling, where the queen had to duck her head. Suddenly, something dropped onto the raft. Metal blinking red, Darren shouted, grabbed the object, and threw it back into the tunnel. It exploded midair, lighting the cavern for one breathless second, then all went black again. She stared at him, shocked. You could have died, she said. So could you, he replied simply. Their eyes, locked, full of fire and fear, and something else, something stronger than either expected to feel down here in the dark. Finally, the river spat them out into a wide-open cavern. High above, a crack of starlight glowed through the ceiling. Oh, ladder was carved into the wall, old and rough but usable. This leads outside the city walls, she said, breathing hard. We climb, Darren said, already gripping the first rung. The climb was long and slow. The stone was slippery, and their muscles burned. But inch by inch, they rose toward freedom. Near the top, the queen paused and looked down. This isn't just escape, she said. This is rebellion. Darren looked up at her, smiling. Then let's rebel together. They reached the surface at dawn. The city lay far behind them, its towers glowing in gold light. But the queen didn't look back. She looked forward, to the empty hills, the unknown lands, and the man beside her. She had left her throne, her palace, her power, but for the first time in her life she felt truly free. The wind was soft on the open hills. The grass moved like waves beneath the rising sun. Birds with glassy wings flew across the sky, leaving glowing trails behind them. The queen and Darren stood on the edge of a quiet cliff. Below them, hidden, among the trees, was a small landing pad. A ship waited there. Old, simple, but fast enough to leave the planet. It had been placed there by one of the Queen's last loyal spies. A backup plan she never thought she'd use. Now it was their only way out. They hadn't spoken much since climbing out of the hidden tunnel. Their bodies were sore, their clothes torn, but the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of everything they couldn't say yet. The Queen stepped forward, looking at the ship. It's ready, she said. One command and it'll take you anywhere. Darren looked at her, frowning slightly. Me? He asked. Not us? She turned slowly, her violet eyes soft. You have no reason to stay, she said. Not now. Darren stepped closer, his voice calm. What about you? She smiled, but it was a tired smile. I left everything behind, she said. My palace, my power, my people. I can't run forever, she added. Sooner or later I'll have to face what I started. Darren crossed his arms, watching her closely. Then why did we escape? He asked. Why come all this way just to part? She lowered her eyes, her voice a whisper. Because I didn't want to see you die. He walked to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. I didn't want to see you die either, he said. And I won't leave you alone. Not now. She looked up at him, pain in her face. If you stay with me, you'll be hunted, she said, marked as a traitor, hated by my own kind. And if I leave, Darren said, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. She turned away, tears beginning to shine in her eyes. I promised you anything, she said, her voice breaking. But I never expected you to choose me. He reached out and gently took her hand. "I didn't choose you because you were a queen," he said. "I chose you because, for a moment, you looked like you needed someone to believe in you." Her hand shook, her breath caught. "No one's ever said that to me," she whispered. He stepped closer, holding her hand tightly. "Then let me be the first," he said. And not the last. Far behind them, in the distant sky, 3 dark ships broke through the clouds. The royal fleet had found them. "They're coming," she said, her voice suddenly sharp. He looked at the ship below, then back at her. "We can still run," he said. "There's time." But she shook her head. "No," she said. "If I keep running, more blood will be spilled. I have to face them, not as their queen, but as something new. And what if they don't accept that?" he asked. She smiled sadly. "Then we build something better." The ships grew closer, loud engines cutting the sky. Darren turned to her, eyes serious. "Then let me stand with you," he said. "Not behind you, not as your prize, but as your equal." She stared at him, her heart full of fear and warmth. Then she nodded slowly. "Together," she said. "Whatever happens next." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a ring made from wire and crystal. "I found this in the ruins," he said. "I've been holding on to it, waiting to know what it meant." He held it out to her. "I think it belongs to you." Her hands trembled as she took it. Tears slid down her cheeks, not of sorrow, but something deeper. Hope. The ships landed with a hiss and fire. Soldiers poured out, weapons ready. But they stopped when they saw her, not in armor, not on a throne, but standing beside a human, holding his hand, no crown on her head, only a ring made of wire. She raised her voice, clear and strong. "I am not your queen anymore," she said. "I am not your weapon, your crown, or your fear. I am a woman who chose her future, and this man, this human, is part of it." The soldiers didn't move. Then slowly, one of them dropped his weapon. Another followed, and then another, until only silence remained. In that moment, the war didn't end, but something greater began.